first thing I do when I'm given a job is look at the period. So research, research, and more research, just gathering images as much as possible so that I feel like I've got a handle on that period. And then I go into it again and look for discrepancies and unusual things in the period that I could use for character. And that could be anything, just, I haven't seen that sleeve shape before, I haven't seen that before, the way somebody's, styling an outfit. And I'll use those, and I'll often have lots of on my laptop, lots of different folders for different characters. And so, like on Gentleman Jack, it'll be Anne Walker ideas, Anne Lister ideas, and as the research comes in, I just scurry them away for a later date. And then I start going into my sketchbook, but that's quite a way in until I've done a lot of research. Then I start sort of scribbling in my sketchbook really rough ideas, and then those translate into finished costume designs. Often my costume designs have lots of research on them as well, because I see them more as sort of conversation starters rather than da-da, that's the finished design. So then I'll take the costume design and I'll go and have conversations, and they will be with the writer, with directors, with producers, with actors, and with makers, and that's really a process of getting everyone's feedback and what they think, and from that, then talking to the makers, we might make a toile, if there's time. Otherwise, we'll just go straight into the fabric and make something up, and then it's fittings. And then right up until filming, when on the morning of the filming, putting the finished outfit on and going to set with the actor and making sure all the theory works in practice.
So every time I'm approached with a script, the very first thing I do is, of course, read it, and read it more than once. So I read it the first time to get a grasp on the story and the characters. But then I read it a second or third time to actually start analyzing and thinking about the logistics of, how much money might these costumes cost and things like that, so I can present it as a budget to the production team. So after I read the script a few times, I then turn towards gathering visual research in order to ground the costumes. I turn towards the internet, books, historical references, and sometimes I even do physical site visits. For example, I just finished a feature down in North Carolina that I costume designed, a musical, and I visited a local high school in North Carolina to get a lay of the land and see what teenagers are wearing nowadays, because what is better than going towards a primary source in order to gather that kind of visual research. So after doing some preliminary research, I then try to do some costume illustrations if time allows, because I find that even if they don't end up looking like what ends up making it to screen, I do it for myself so that I can capture the essence of a character as close to reading the script as possible. After that, I bring all of this to the director and the actors, and we begin our dialogue about the characters. It's a constant stream of back and forth collaboration, and I always love hearing the input coming from the actor themselves, because as a costume designer, I love it when an actor gives me their opinion, or, we share thoughts as equals and creative partners to figure out what their character might be wearing or what they might be, moving in and things like that, because I'm a firm believer that if an actor believes in a costume designer's vision, then that will end up making the final product just that much better. And so after that, we bring what's in my head onto into real life, and I work with the incredible, talented, meticulous body of work through assistants, shoppers, costume technicians, and costume artisans, and all of that culminates into the costume fittings at the very end, where the real magic happens.
Okay. Basically, when it comes to the interviewing process, I work very closely with my agent, and we start to look at projects that are coming into Vancouver. And I try to look for projects that kind of fit me and what I'm wanting to do. And again, I'm always wanting to try something new. Again, doing a lot of alien post-apocalyptic stuff for a long time. I try to tell myself, okay, now Angelina, it's time to switch out of that world and try something else. And Vancouver also gets a lot of dark stories as well. So I'm always looking for something a little brighter to try. So anyways, I work with my agency and we try to find scripts that work well for me. And then once I get a script that I really love, I read it over and over and over again, and to the point where I can visually see the whole script in my brain. And then I start to break down the script and I start to take each of the characters and I start to do a development for each of the characters in their arc system. And again, looking at them emotionally, mentally, and physically. And then I start to look at the changes. And then I start to think about keywords that describe that character. And then once I've kind of plotted this all out and I've got thousands of sheets all around me, I start to look for visuals, color palettes, things that kind of represent texture, anything that starts to give me an idea of who this character is. And now working in the industry, it's changed a lot, right? Because now we deal with Zoom phone calls, and a lot of the times now we're doing interviews like this instead of meeting in person. So I basically start to work with either I do myself or I work with a really amazing visual artist, and we start to create these visual boards together. And I usually look at the first 6 to 8 characters in a project, and I really try to nail them down to the best of my ability from what I get from the script. And then from there, I pitch it to the producers and the creators of the show. And and try to give them an idea of what the show can look like from my point of view. And then I also try to get into the point of view where they may be looking at as well. And then so hopefully from there, I've won their hearts and I've brought their project alive. And then, hopefully at that point, I'm starting the project. And then from once I've gotten onto the project, I start to really work closely with the creators of the show, the showrunner, the producing director, production designer. And then we really start to talk about the show and where we want to go with the show and how we see each of the cast members. And for example, working on a show that I did, The Stand, it was important that we read all 9 scripts right away and create an arc for each of the characters. And then previous episodes, we're just doing an overall look and trying to see what is the overall look of this character. So that's a really important part. So once we get to that point and we start to see what we like, what we don't like, and then we figure out who the cast member is, then we start putting more input into it until we get these final boards that we feel really confident with. And then we start to feel like, okay, we've nailed this character, this character, this character. And then from there, we present it to the studio. And then usually for costumes, it's between 10 to 15 minutes in the past for me, and it gives us an opportunity to describe each of the characters and who the characters are and where the characters are from the beginning of the project to the end of the project. So that's kind of the beginnings of the process. And then once we start to get the cast start to come in, I start to work really closely with the cast. And for me, it's really important to work with them because I think, these are the people who are wearing the costumes. If they don't feel good about it, then they're not going to want to play that role. So for me, I start to get their input and we start looking at the visual boards that we've created, and then they start to add their little bits and pieces to it. And then at the end, we come up with a final look. And then from there, we start to do illustrations, or then we start building costumes, we start purchasing costumes. My favorite thing is purchasing and building at the same time and manipulating pieces together so that we get this wonderful, almost like collective piece of garment, which is really great. So that kind of takes you from the process of the interview stage to the conceptual point, working with the creators of the show, to working with the actors. And then my number one rule is, once we've got a costume made and we're doing the fitting, we do the fitting, and my number one thing I say to every cast member that comes into a fitting with me is like, look, if you don't like this costume, we don't shoot it. We don't show it. We don't look at it. We never see it ever again. And that's where I gained the confidence of each of the actors that come into the fitting, because they now know it's about everyone. It's not just about a project. It's about them feeling good about themselves as well. And then we shoot only what works, and then we send it off, and then we create the character, and then that's what gets onto the final screen.
I think everyone's design process is different because, I think the one thing that people have to understand is that designing is like any art form, like if you're a painter or you're a sculptor. And so every designer has their sort of own creative way into it. Some people are, they get into it right away. For me, I like to sort of think about things, digest things, as my ACD would say. I get the script, I read through it, I look through tons and tons of research and images even before I interview. Because for me, I need to, and then I rehearse like sort of a pitch script. And I think that kind of becomes my thesis for what I want to do. There's the smaller components in a film, and then the larger component is sort of what I individually want to do as an artist. So what I want to improve upon, what I want to say about society, it just depends. And so for me, it's like a digestion, look at images, look at movies, read, and then sort of have a formulation and a thesis for how I want to approach the whole entire project. And as I go into actually designing, the process is very similar. I look at a lot of inspiration. I, talk to my ACD a lot. And I try to, I think in general, I try to find the thing that's like less spoken of. So if it's like a female character, I like to think of what have we seen in film in female characters? What have we not seen? How can I sort of push the agenda for what has not been seen? And how can I tell a more thorough story? Um, and then, with people that I work with, like my tailors, fabric swatchers, buyers, I tend to show them inspiration and I say, I want it to feel like this. And that's a big part of, what I do is like I speak in feeling, or describe something in terms of like it should sound or emote this. I'm not a very big it has to be this item of clothing on this person, because I feel like that takes you it takes you into a corner and you can't sort of expand beyond that. But if you talk about emoting and feeling, there's so many different ways to sort of solve that problem. Yeah, I hope that answers the question.